Hi, and welcome back to one of our online lectures here in World History. Today we're going to kick off our unit on ancient Rome. Our outcome that we're going to look at specifically here is geography and early republic, but we're actually going to spend less time on geography than we normally do. And the reason for that is, as Rome starts out, it's very small, and it ends up growing to be this really large empire. And we're not going to look at the whole empire just yet, so we don't have a lot of geography to look at, but we will talk about where Rome was established and the geography there. So we've actually got 3 constructive response questions that we're going to tie into today's lecture. I'm going to read these to you and understand we're going to work on these for a while. These will not be self-contained in this set of notes. Instead, it's going to be something we're going to build up to over the next series of lessons. So the first question says, describe who the earliest Roman settlers were and how Rome was founded according to the Romans. So you're going to hear about what cultures were in Italy prior to the Romans and how they influenced the Romans. You're also going to hear the mythological story of how Rome was founded according to the Romans. So we'll be able to answer that question for sure today. The other 2, not so much, though. We're going to get bits and pieces of these as we go. So the second question says, compare and contrast the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire using specific examples. Well, we're really only going to focus on the Republic today. And we'll even kind of build off of that in the next lesson. So we're only going to be able to answer part of that question today. And then the last question says, classify the contributions the Romans made to the cultural advancement of the world. Well, anything the Romans did that we consider good, that they left us, we can use to answer this question. So again, this will be something that we'll have to revisit as we progress through this unit. So these questions will be seen again for sure. So what's our roadmap to learning? What will we learn here? We're going to talk about the origin and geography of Rome, but like I said, the geography is going to play a much lesser role in this unit than it has in our units on Mesopotamia, on Egypt, on China, on India, and on Greece. We're going to talk about the earliest Romans, the people who helped give Rome its culture, and we're going to focus on 3 groups called the Latins, the Greeks, and the Etruscans. Obviously, we know the Greeks pretty well at this point, but we will revisit them very, very briefly. We're going to talk about early Roman culture, the Roman Republic, because Rome's really formed into 2 eras in history, the Republic era, where the people had the power, and the Roman Empire, where a Roman emperor had power. And we're going to kind of see that dichotomy as we go. Obviously, that's one of our constructive response questions, but we'll set it up here in this lecture. The last thing we're going to talk about is a real showing of Roman might in a group of battles called the Punic Wars, where Rome fights the city of Carthage. You're going to hear about Hannibal in that particular story, and we're going to basically see the power of the Roman army as it extends across the Mediterranean Sea into North Africa. So that's what we're going to look at here in today's notes. So let's set the stage. With the defeat of the Persians by Alexander the Great and the eventual decline of the Greek civilization, power would eventually shift west toward the Italian peninsula. Let me use this tiny little map down here at the bottom. So we know Alexander's father conquered Greece, and Alexander himself went on to conquer Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey. Get my cursor back here. And the rest of the Persian Empire, which also included Egypt. But after his empire started to die out, and they didn't die specifically, but it started to fade away as a power base. What we started to see over here in the west is Italy. Here specifically Rome started to become very, very powerful. So the Romans would build an amazing empire filled with many different cultures and would help spawn a brand new religion, Christianity. So in the midst of this whole Roman unit, we're going to talk about our 4th big religion of the semester. We've already talked about Judaism, we've talked about Hinduism and Buddhism. Christianity will be number 4. Our next unit will be Islam, which is our last of the big religions. So we'll see how all of that comes together. Now, the origins of Rome are kind of interesting because if you had talked to the Romans, this is the story that they would believe. Their legend says that twins named Romulus and Remus were abandoned by their mother on the Tiber River, which is in modern-day Italy, and they were raised by a she-wolf, a female wolf. Well, do we believe this actually happened? Probably not. The Romans would have said yes, but we see it more as a legend today. So as the story continues, these two boys grew up, and later the two boys decided to build a city. Well, they kind of got into a fight over who was going to rule and what was it going to be called, and in the end, Romulus kills his brother Remus. So eventually Romulus kills Remus, and the city of Rome is named after Romulus. You can see in his name there, it almost looks like Rome. So that's the origins of Rome according to the Romans. We're going to talk about those three groups that I mentioned a minute ago, the Latins, the Greeks, and the Etruscans, and they're the real originators of Rome. So we'll get to that here shortly. I did tell you we're going to briefly talk about the geography. Like I said, we're not really going to go into a lot of detail here because we're only going to spend time looking at Italy at first. But the Roman Empire will eventually encompass all the land around the Mediterranean Sea, which, if we wanted to cover the geography on that, would probably take us several days. So we're not going to go that route. But Rome itself was actually built on a very hilly area. It was built on the 7 rolling hills of the Tiber River. It is located on the Italian peninsula, which is, of course, modern-day Italy. And that's a really good location, especially for trade. If you look at its location strategically, it's right in the heart, right in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. And that's going to matter later on. You have the Adriatic Sea to the east. So if we look at this map here, the Adriatic Sea would be on this side, or the eastern side of Italy. And as I already mentioned, it is near the midpoint of the Mediterranean Sea, and that's going to be a good strategic location for a capital like Rome to grow. And at its peak, it will definitely have more than 1 million people, which is fairly significant, even in the modern world today. Their climate was good. They had a Mediterranean climate. It was warm year-round. It encouraged outdoor activities, so much like the Greeks, they're going to be outdoorsy people. So there's definitely a similarity there between the Greeks and the Romans. So that's really all what we're going to do with geography. Now what we want to do is we want to look at those first Romans, those 3 groups that I mentioned. So 3 groups settled on the Italian peninsula from 1000 to 500 BC. And each of these groups are going to provide a little bit of culture to the Romans. So we're going to start with the Latins. The Latins really are considered to be the first Romans, and they built their original settlement pretty simply out of wooden huts. I mean, they weren't big master builders like the Greeks or like what the Romans will eventually become. So, as I just mentioned, they are considered to be the first Romans. And one of the things that definitely the Romans will take from them is language. You obviously see Latins being the first thing that comes to mind is typically the Latin language, which will be the common language of the Roman Empire later on. So they helped spread Latin-derived languages to this area and will be absorbed by the Roman Republic and eventually the Roman Empire. So that's our first group. Second group is the Greeks. There's no doubt we're going to see a lot of connection here. Some Greeks moved north into Italy during that decline of that Hellenistic culture period that Alexander set in. People migrate, people move, and when they do, they take ideas with them. So there's no doubt some people left Greece and brought culture with them. They moved into southern Italy and the island nearby called Sicily. So settled in southern Italy and Sicily. And they brought all of Italy, including Rome, into contact with the Greek civilization. As I mentioned, this is a theme in world history. Migration spreads ideas. Sometimes that migration is done intentionally. People just want to get up and move. Sometimes they're forced to get up and move. In this case, I don't believe it was the latter. It would have been the former. They would have migrated out of their own curiosity, perhaps for economic reasons as well. And so the things that the Greeks brought, of course, with their architecture, you're going to see a lot of things that the Romans built. In fact, you did see a lot of things the Romans had built in engineering and empire. They're very similar to what the Greeks built. Their columns, their buildings out of marble, etc., etc., etc. Of course, they're going to bring democracy and philosophy with them as well. The last group is the Etruscans, and the Etruscans are kind of interesting. You can see in this little area up here on this little map, excuse me, What you see in green is where the Etruscans were located. They were skilled metal workers, and they were native to northern Italy, so they didn't migrate there. They were already there. They strongly influenced Roman civilization in a number of ways. For example, they influenced the Roman arch. The Roman arch, which is going to be a very important material and space-saving device used by the Romans in their aqueducts and the Colosseum and a number of their different buildings. A lot of the information they got to build those came from the Etruscans. But I think one of the more interesting things that the Etruscans used to influence the Romans is their lust for killing. The Etruscans were known for having fights to the death. They were very violent people in terms of ceremonial fights. And the Romans will definitely take that and use that in their fighting in the arenas, in the Colosseum. If you've seen the film Gladiator, a lot of that originated with the Etruscan people. So there you have three different groups, the Latins, the Greeks, and the Etruscans, that provided early culture from Rome. And you move up in history, this is what happens. Nobody's really original anymore. They're borrowing from cultures all over the place. We do this even today. So here you have a map. You can see these groups on here. What you see in this kind of vertical line area, this would have been where some of the Greek people settled, certainly over here in the eastern part, because this would have been closer to Greece, which would have been over here. You can see in the purple, again, this would have been the Latins and maybe some other groups that were there as well, and the Etruscans were up here in the north. You're going to see the Carthaginians in orange here. We're going to talk about them a little bit later. So that's the end of part one. Again, we've talked about the origins of Rome, Remus and Romulus, which is the legend according to the Romans. We looked at the Latins, the Greeks, and the Etruscans. What we want to do next is we want to look at that Roman culture that develops under the Roman Republic, and we're going to talk about the Punic Wars. So stick around for part two.